Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I thank everybody that's involved with this process because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher, it is about us, the authors.
Hello there. Welcome to another session. And before I get into talking about the book, I'd like you to know that I would like to hear from you. I function best questions and answers. So if you have any questions, anything I say stimulates you to think of an idea or a thought that you'd like to have, or a feeling you'd like to express, just come on. I'll give you just sort of a brief synopsis of the book. Elton wrote in, "Hi, Harold, nice to see you again." Okay, Elton. Well, let's hope you can answer or give me some questions so that I can try to answer them. Let me tell you how the book started. I've been a therapist, a psychologist for over 50 years. And back during the AIDS crisis, I started seeing a number of gay men who basically let me know that they were more frightened about growing old as a gay man than of dying. And so I began to look at what can be done to change that. That was basically internalized gay ageism, where they feared growing old, as many people do, obviously, in our culture. And so what I wanted to do was write, which started out actually as a professional paper about aging and how to deal with aging issues through the life cycle. And then I realized, I was writing for a professional audience. And what I wanted was just to get out to you and people like you who don't have access necessarily to therapy, who may not be in a big city, etc. So I wrote the book as basically a self-help book with a series of questions that one can ask oneself and to take them through the process of dealing with aging issues. The book is divided into 3 areas: body, mind, and spirit. And there are a series of questions within each of these sections with a lot of explanation about what the questions are about, how they're relevant, etc. And actually, if you go through the whole series, it's the equivalent of about 4 years of therapy. But I wanted this to be in the hands of people who don't have access to therapists. And a special thing about the book is that it highlights the gay experience, that the coming out process teaches us how to deal with a crisis, because probably the coming out process is one of the most intense and prolonged crises that we as gay men can experience. And I can go into that in more detail, but what that does is to teach us how to deal with a crisis, which we then can use to deal with aging, specifically midlife crisis, or, as I've discovered, aging at all ages, whether you're in your 20s or your 40s, 50s, or your 70s, or like me, I'm 87, and I've had to deal with these issues. Hi, Susan. Susan Harris just commented. Good evening, Harold. Great to see you. Okay, well, Susan, do you have any questions to ask? Because I can, I can talk for a long time about some of these issues. Okay, let me start out by saying something about why I wanted to republish the book in 2022. When it came out in 2000, it was the first of its kind. There were books that dealt with aging, but they were dealing with basically white non-gay men. They didn't deal with gay issues. In fact, they rarely came up. And so I wanted to write a book specifically around gay issues, of which, by the way, the only words I use in the book are gay and non-gay, because I wanted for us to be able to read a book that very clearly says gay is the norm and non-gay is the other. Okay. Also, when the book came out in 2000, I was very clear that the book can only speak to white gay men, because since that was the vast majority of my experience, not only, but it was the vast majority, and I felt I couldn't speak for any other group. Well, in the intervening years, enough people have told me, both gay, non-gay, white, black, male, female, that aspects of this book applied to them as well. So that now I can say with much more confidence that I couldn't have said in 2000. Everyone can read the book and get something from it and use it to effectively deal with the aging process throughout their lifespan. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, then I'll talk about, Charissa Carey Wade commented, "Hey, Harold, how are you doing tonight?" Well, I'm doing fine, but I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to know what questions you would like answered, what thoughts you have, and also tell me where you're coming from. because I'm here living in Oaxaca, Mexico, and I don't know, are you from the East Coast, West Coast, the South, or whatever? So I'd love to hear not only where you're from, but any question you might have. So let me talk about the coming out process and why I feel that's a very important milestone in our lives. Because in order to come out, one has to first be honest about oneself. It's learning to be authentic, learning to say who you are with the assurance or a feeling that this is who I am. And I'm sure for many of you, it's not just about being gay, it's about many other issues, but it's about being honest with yourself and then being honest with the people around you. And again, that doesn't mean that I'm saying you have to come out to every single person or even your family, because there are some situations where it's dangerous to come out to the family, as many young people have found out when they've been kicked out of their house. But the first step in coming out is the whole issue of being authentic to yourself and being authentic to the people that you have connections with. Then the next step is looking to a community and seeing a community out there that you can relate to and be a part of. Because when you come out, in many cases, you have to leave behind the support groups that you were used to. So the second part of coming out, and that's where it really comes from, shifting from being homosexual to being gay. Because being gay means being part of a community. And then once that happens, then there is the movement into a sense of hope with a positive future. So there are the three aspects of coming out. It's being authentic, it's seeing your community, your peer group, and it's having a positive sense of your future. And those are basic lessons that you can use not only at midlife, but also as you age and you become an old person. It's the same process. It's learning for who you are. It's accepting who you are. It's moving into another community of peers. And again, seeing a positive future to it. Because this internalized ageism is something which is so pervasive in this culture. And so many people have difficulty. I mean, like I said, in the 80s, I suddenly saw so many gay men who literally were more frightened of of becoming an old gay man than of dying of AIDS. Okay, now, I don't know who's out there, but I would love to hear some questions from you. Okay, well, until I hear a question, I'll just continue talking. And one of the reasons, someone's commented, I think gay people are afraid to age, especially if they're alone and have no one. What can you advise for young men out there who are afraid of aging and feel so alone? Well, the first thing I would advise is looking for whom you can relate to. Now, with the internet, There are self-help groups and community centers and helplines. There's a very prominent helpline that comes out of San Francisco, but you can almost access any community center. And if there's not one in your neighborhood, then you can plug into the internet looking for gay groups. Because in almost all of the major cities and urban centers, there are now gay and lesbian community centers. And for example, if you're older, but you don't have to be older, you can even plug into SAGE, SAGE. It's a national organization that's basically in New York City, but it has, in a sense, affiliates throughout the country in all the community centers. So plug into sageusa.org and bring up your question, asking for what community groups are in your area, what youth groups there are. You can also go into PFLAG, the Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. That's pflag.org. And there's other organizations if you're young. GLISTEN, which works with high school students and people in their late teens. So if you have access to a computer, just simply start plugging some of these questions in and you will get some answers. And especially if there's a community center anywhere near you, reach out to it. And if you're young, you can also go into the Hetrick Martin organization. It's an organization based in New York which deals with young people. Okay, a question from Samantha. Was there a point in your life where you blame yourself for being gay and regretted it? Ooh. Blame myself. Well, I can't say that I ever blamed myself. I knew when I was 6 or 7 years old that there was something different about me. I couldn't identify it. I didn't have the mental capacity to put it into a concept. I just knew that there was something about me that was very different, and I had to keep it a secret from my family. Now, in my case, my family found out I was gay when I was 14, because I'd already been out cruising and having sex for a couple of years. And through police entrapment, I got arrested. So my coming out was done by courtesy of the police department, which obviously was a very traumatic experience for me and for the next number of years, until I finally left home when I turned 18 and was no longer a ward of the court and began to live an openly gay lifestyle. Did I regret it? I can't say that I ever regretted it. What I regretted was the sense of isolation, the sense of aloneness, the sense of no one was there for me, which is why at 14 I made a very serious suicide attempt, because I felt there was no future for me. I had no life, definitely no support around me. And it's when, as an adult, when I started living a life and becoming more of who I wanted to be, I would sometimes picture that 14-year-old and the devastation and the desolation he felt. And I would kind of talk to him and say, the world is going to be so different. Just hold on. Know that it's going to be better for you. Okay, waiting for some more questions. Then let me say, one of the very positive things about having been arrested is that when I was in the detention home, I looked around and I saw absolutely no one who looked like me. I was this white, Jewish, middle-class kid. And in the detention home, all I saw were Black youth, Hispanic youth, mostly Mexican American because I lived in Los Angeles at the time, or what in my naive thinking, hillbilly, some alien for me. And I realized we all were alike. We all were outsiders. Now, I didn't have the intellectual framework to put it into those words, but what I just knew was somehow I was more like them than I was like the rest of the society. And after I left home, became more aware, became more political, I could then put it into the framework of what it meant being an outsider. And that's kind of how my activism got started. Okay. Tony McGurk commented, how damaging, in your opinion, is the internalized aging that you've mentioned here? Okay. I think the internalized ageism is something that, specifically with gays, I call it the internalized gay ageism. It's incredibly damaging. As I said, it was so strong that I knew men who rather die rather than have to deal with aging as a gay man. But I think if you talk to women in this culture, you talk to anyone who ages, they have to really deal with their own internalized feelings of negativity about aging. I mean, you get it every day in the newspapers, you get it on television, the advertisements, the ideal body that nobody really has or very few. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, to help deal with that internalized ageism. Now, Parker Brooks said, I've never really thought of how challenging the aging process and coming out for gay people are. Thanks for shedding light to the subject, Harold. Well, you're welcome. And the aging process is so insidious. I mean, first of all, it's natural. It happens to all of us. And I think the coming out process helps us because at some point in the coming out process, there's that moment of saying, oh, I'm not where I was. I'm now in a new place. And I have to openly accept and willingly accept that new place. And that can happen when you're in your teens. It can happen in your 20s, your 40s. It happens throughout life. There's always this process of reevaluating yourself, of acknowledging what you've accomplished, who you are, looking for supports around you, and having a sense of a positive future. Denise Witt said, sorry to hear that you tried to commit suicide at such a young age. I hope you're doing much better now. Yes, I can assure you I'm doing much, much better. But I think it's important to have had that experience because I know what it can feel like to feel like absolutely there's no support, there's no one there for you, and to feel totally alone in the world. And I can say that that thought and those feelings are far from me, but it was important because anyone who comes to me and talks about having those feelings, I can understand how you can feel that way, how you can feel so desperately alone, especially when your family turns against you, you're told you'll have no future, etc., etc. So that for me, I value that I've had that experience. Okay, Carmen Rodriguez commented, regarding the republishing of your book, did you add new information or tweak some stuff to fit the modern audiences? Well, Carmen, you kind of read my mind because there are two parts to the new book. The first or the second part is a reprint of the self-help part. But the epilogue that I wrote for the 2022 version says exactly what you're talking about. Because when I wrote the book, again, it was in the late 90s. Well, since the late 90s, we had 2001, we've had the Black Lives Matter, we've had the Me Too movement, we've had a world shift in perceptions, we've had COVID, and in my own experience, in 2001, I began the first intense relationship with a Black man who eventually, in 2011, became my husband, with whom I'm still living with, and we're here together in Mexico. And as a result of that experience of having to look at my own internalized racism and all issues around racism, he and I began a salon 8 years ago, actually 9 years ago, dealing with racism, white privilege, and white supremacy. And that salon went on, as I said, for 8 years, and which we did a lot of reading, a lot of open discussion. And I talk about this in my epilogue and how that changed my appreciation and awareness. Okay, Christine Gines, which is scarier for you as a gay individual, the aging process or the coming out part? Well, Christine, to be honest with you, as I said, the coming out was done by the police. So that's how my family found out. And I would say, since I started living a gay lifestyle openly at age 18 and came out professionally in my 30s, after I got my doctorate and my first job, et cetera, I had one of those moments of truth and I came out publicly, which closed a lot of doors because in those days, if you were gay, you couldn't get into many of the advanced programs beyond the doctorate. They were closed. So I will say the aging process was more difficult for me. So I say that when I tell you I wrote the book to share the professional knowledge, etc., I also wrote the book for me, to help me in my aging process. Because I had a hard time accepting my becoming a middle-aged gay man. Now, I think one of the reasons why many gay men have a real problem with it is because our aging processes differently. We don't age with all of the markers that society gives to non-gays about children. Oh, I just got a notice from the person who is in charge of the speech. We're 30 minutes time now. We have to wrap it up. Okay, well, let me just finish this point that aging is a process we go through throughout our life because it means taking a deep breath, saying, I'm not what I was, but I am who I am now. And there are people who recognize me and can appreciate me for who I am now. Okay, well, I guess that sort of winds it up. I'm going to be talking again tomorrow. Let's see, at noon tomorrow. Tune into the same channel and we'll continue the discussion. And if you have questions, I would love to start out with your asking the questions and let me take it from there. Okay, so thank you for attending, for asking the questions, and by all means, ask more questions. Okay, goodbye.